it's so nice to see all of you again. It's been a while, hasn't it, since we got together?
Summer went by so fast.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, well, it does always, doesn't it? How are your family and how are the children doing and how's work? How are things?
Things are good. We just celebrated Thanksgiving, and I'm grateful for everything I have. My family, my friends, and I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, I think about it's always great to get together with family, and it just takes me back, to when I was a kid and how I was raised and everything. And I don't know. Have we ever talked about that? Like how you were raised, and maybe we've been raised very differently. I don't know. I think of my mom and dad, two very different cultures. One Ukrainian, one British, and one wanted to be really strict, my mom, and my father was, no, let her go, let her be free. I don't know which one is right. So I could say they really weren't very authoritarian, but they were always working. So I had to sort of follow them around to get attention. What was it like for you when you were, think back to your days of childhood?
I'm originally from Israel. And my father was born in Bulgaria, and he immigrated with his family and came to Israel. And then he met my mother. Her parents are from Bulgaria. She was born in Israel, but they both speak the Ladino language, which is a mix of Spanish and Jewish.
Sephardic.
And this is a language that the Jewish in exile were carrying with them from country to country. And they survived with that language. They maintained their culture through stories and songs and music. And so my parents were raising us according to that culture, and there were very strict rules in the home. Like my father was the breadwinner, and my mother was raising the kids. So, but we knew that if we are misbehaving or something is happening, it's enough that my mother said, "Oh, your father, I'll tell your father." That's it.
The stern father.
But he was actually very kind. And we were a big, happy family. We were sleeping in the same room, 4 kids. And
but 4 kids in one room, and then your parents in another room? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
And we were in very close contact with our uncle and aunts and cousins.
Oh, so an extended family.
Yeah, we were spending a lot of time in the weekends.
So there were lots of people to raise you, right?
Yeah. Grandma, grandpa.
Same age cousins, so you had lots in common with each other as kids.
Cousins are the first friends, right? So,
Yes.
What about you, Fatima?
So I was born in South Africa, and I guess started off my childhood in South Africa before I came to Canada. So I was 13 when we moved to Canada. And so like you in South Africa, I had all of our extended family, grandma and grandpas and cousins and aunts and uncles. And when we came to Canada, it was just mom and dad and my brother, sister and I. And so, we moved from this really close family with lots of people around us to just a nuclear family. Yeah. And so that was a big adjustment. And, but I come from a very supportive family. I'm very, I feel very blessed and grateful, like you're saying, to have, my mom and dad, and even the relationship I have with my siblings. I still chat to my sister almost every day over the phone, and to my mom definitely every day, checking in, how are you and what's the day been like, and so I feel grateful for that. But it certainly was a big change, right?
Were they strict?
Was lonely.
Were they strict?
No. My parents were not strict, but they always, I don't know if we were just good kids or they were not strict. But, we knew our boundaries, and I think we respected it. We knew the expectations. We were always very open. They were always open with us on what, what they shared their values, and they shared their hopes and dreams for us, and how they felt we should be living our lives. And we had open conversations about everything you can think about. There was never a question that I didn't feel comfortable asking my parents about. And so even today, you know, I really treasure that relationship and still go to them for advice. And, you know, when my kids are giving me a hard time, hey, Dad, you know, pick up the phone and, you know, what do I do here? So you know, I feel that perhaps that also got strengthened because we were just alone as a nuclear family. We had to learn to rely on each other and, you know, become each other's best friends, confidants, cousins, aunts, you know, to each other. So we had to wear multiple hats in that relationship.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. And what about for you, Auralee?
Yeah, well, growing up in Canada, it was different for me, and I really mourn kind of not having that sort of tribe connection with my family. My mom, well, my dad left when I was 5, so she raised us as a single mother, but had a lot of poverty, addictions, so we did spend some time in child welfare and foster care. My mother is Métis, was Métis, she's passed on now, but she married a white guy. And so we had a lot of, you know, struggles, I think, being that we were white passing Métis.
I see. Okay.
And, you know, there were some of my mom's friends, like, kind of grew up in some of the projects, as you call it, where there'd be other single moms. But I found when I was hanging out with my mom's friends who were Indigenous families that were, you know, had a lot of kids, that those became my friends, my cousins, my tribe, because her family was farther away in BC and my dad's family wasn't really involved. So it was, you know, kind of lonely in those same ways, being this sort of nuclear family, but also being the eldest and being parentified. You know, I had a lot of responsibilities to, you know, a lot of worries as a child that I didn't need to have as a child, but because of just the family I was born into and the circumstances of living in poverty and being a single mother and experiencing domestic violence and not having a lot of higher education.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that I had to carry as a child, and certainly brought me into the field of social work, I think, because of those personal experiences too.
Right. Oh, that must be really difficult, but it sounds that you've been able to come through.
Yeah, made you stronger for it, right? And so that's powerful, though.
I think that nuclear structure of family has had created challenges, you know, to creating that sort of community and that tribe sense that, you know, certainly when I think about how other newcomer families or other cultures that have really thrived in that nuclear format, I've always longed for that. And so growing up and having the opportunity to connect with Indigenous families and, you know, seeing that there's, you know, multi-generational families living under one roof, to me, that really was what I wanted, you know, because I felt lonely as a child not having that. And I think that we still live in a society that states, you know, you must be this and you must be that and you must be this. And if you don't fit within that two-parent nuclear family structure,
That's true.
there's a judgment about that. So I can see how for women, especially single mothers too, like finding that within a, you know, a culture that is very patriarchal, I think, on some level still today.
Well, I work with newcomer families, and I work with many single parent families, and I see, like you were talking about a single parent, how is it difficult for them, especially when there is no, you know, the extended family around. So many times they just try to connect with family back home on their phones and ask for advice and help. So it still counts, like everything that they learn from home, from family, is still very important. The cultural piece of even how to raise a child, it's still very, very effective. And but there is also the judgmental piece, like sometimes the single parent want to show that I'm strong. I can raise my children alone. I don't
Be
need help.
both mother and father.
But sometimes they are scared if somebody knows their problem, or maybe my children will be taken away from me. Like there's always, I don't know why or where they hear that
Word of mouth,
if I'm
I
not a good
guess.
mom, my children will be taken away.
Yeah, it must be
Lots of
word of
people,
mouth.
yeah, and
Mother
the
blame.
people come from countries, where they are more authoritarian in the approach. So, even if you're talking about the school relationship or education systems in other countries that are more regimented and more strict, people would be really fearful of the teacher or the principal or any authoritarian figure, police, for example, right? And so if you are brought up and raised in an environment that's like that, then it's easy to see how people would think that their kids may be taken away from them, if they're parenting them differently than what the social norm is here, right? Or what the expectation is here. And for parents to be able to instill their culture and teach their culture and to their kids is a huge part of what shapes a child's identity. And once you don't have that and you have that disconnect, it's really difficult for the child to even define their own identity. And then, that carries a whole host of other consequences as an adult. Who am I? What am I? Where do I belong, right? And if you don't have that, you can't contribute. Forget about, contributing for yourself or strengthening yourself.
So speaking
do you
about,
want to add to that?
Yeah, speaking about cultural identity, what I see with newcomers is that the children are usually acculturating very fast because they are in the school. They absorb everything, the Canadian culture, and they want to fit in, while the parents are kind of staying behind and they're not connected to the system yet. It takes time, and maybe language is a barrier, and they don't understand the system. So there is a real gap, and sometimes it creates a conflict because, like you said, the parents want to instill that those cultural values for them to grow.
Those intergenerational conflicts, right?
Yeah.
Which is really difficult to then, reconcile within the family, right?
And plus, they also come with always the hope of a better future for their children. So they see that in their countries. So it's not just, very static, very rigid rules that they have to follow. They always want their children to do better than them, or that they would have more opportunity here. So to focus on schoolwork, to focus on their education, to, that's more of the focus as opposed to taking the time and running around and doing all the social activities maybe. So there's just this stricter idea of what they hope for their children. And I can see that in my own Ukrainian cultural heritage. So the first generations, because they were born into the Depression, they just had to work just to try and feed the family, right? The next generation took education extremely seriously. So my cousins, the group that's just before me, everything was about getting to school, getting an education, and trying to get out of that sort of hole of poverty. And then the next generation in the 60s starts to take these things for granted, right? So then it's just, oh yes, well, education is here because it's just here, and things and attitudes change, right? But if I went back to that original community, I would say about identity, because it was largely a pocket of Ukrainian Canadian community, they felt some strength because everybody around them was sort of similar,
Others, yeah.
right? So that helped you feel that there was an extended family all around you because they were sort of similar to you, a bit like you would describe about Indigenous, when you're in maybe a setting where there's the extended family. So they all care. But for newcomers who don't today have that sense of community and identity, it must create a big clash. So for example, just even in my own family, so I would have a mother that would say, no, if she acts up, she's going to bed without any supper. Very strict British. And, if for my father, that's criminal. You cannot send a kid to bed without feeding the child, right? So even within the family, and so you can imagine when people come from outside, not knowing the culture, some of these approaches can be very dire and strict and unbearable for, you know, I mean, the love that they want to give their kids, right? And then while it's all about the child's rights, there also have to be rights in Canada for a mother and a father. I mean, it's the human rights, Charter of Human Rights, you know. So everybody should have a right, not just the child's right. It should also be mother and father rights.
You know, parents should have the right to be able to teach their kids, you know, their faith and their culture and traditions, and you know, and uplift the child in that way. But it's all balance at the end of the day for me, you know. So balancing both and ensuring that everyone's able to live harmoniously, right? But you know that intergenerational conflict that you find in many families, sometimes can be interpreted by others, institutions, organizations, systems, as being really, you know, dangerous. You know, and that's where the element of oppressive, you know, and that's where the harm can sometimes happen, right? Where kids get apprehended from families just because there's not an understanding about the cultural nuances, right?
Right. There's a prejudgment and a prejudice. It's a prejudgment,
and so that's what I'm saying.
Against a certain culture. Absolutely.
And so I mean, we all carry our own biases depending on, you know, how we were raised and where we were raised and what we saw and what we were exposed to, right? And so using that lens to prejudge other families and the way they choose to raise their kids, you know, starts this cycle that's very difficult to get out. Once you're in the system, you know how difficult it is, you know, for people to get kids back, for example, you know, it's really difficult.
I mean, I think in Canada we've learned so much. You know, we still have a long ways to go around separating children from their family and community. And, you know, we see the impacts that has on children that are growing up in foster care or multiple foster care or group care. And the impact of that, I think, has been felt largely. So, I mean, as a government, you know, as provincial government, as a Canadian government, I think we're really learning from the impact of the Millennium Scoop, they call, you know, from the residential schools to the 60s Scoop to the, you know, current numbers of Indigenous children in care. And, you know, having been a child in care and understanding, you know, how that disconnection impacts, you know, sibling relationships. For some children, you know, growing up in care, they may not see their siblings if there's a large number of siblings.
Oh, that's horrible.
So, you know, you might create other relationships, but that primary sort of connection that you have with family and community and culture, I feel that as in Saskatchewan anyway, you know, we definitely have come a long way in recognizing that, and, you know, looking to the United Nations Rights of the Child too, where we look at some of the articles that ensure that that child, you know, has that connection to family, culture, heritage, you know. So I think we're definitely coming a long way from where it was as a child.
What would you say, Ayalah, to that?
Yeah, in my experience of working with newcomer families and seeing the challenges that they have, and I think I wish if there was more dialogue about culture, more understanding, more training in institutions, maybe in the schools, social services, even courts, everywhere, that somehow to raise awareness that there's no one way to raise a child. There's so many ways, and like you said, there are many ways, and these ways are based on wisdom of so many years. And we bring it here to Canada. It's a multicultural society, and we have even a multicultural kind of, it's ingrained in our constitution. So why not bring it and raise the issue with the government? Or I don't know how, but I feel like there is a real gap in understanding each other.
And I think that understanding comes from having conversations like this.
Exactly. So if everybody could only be like us around this table this morning and talking multiculturally together, we learn a lot from each other. It's a...
That's absolutely, you know, it comes from talking, it comes from sharing, and it comes from, you know, willing to to enter conversations that's not always comfortable, right? We call them courageous conversations because, and it's because you're giving a piece of yourself and you putting yourself in a vulnerable position, having to share, because look, not everything that people might come with is good too, right? So, we have to discuss what the strengths and this works. What is it that doesn't work and why doesn't it work as well is important to look at.
Well, we'll have to leave that for another time. But great conversation. Nice to see you all again. And
Yeah, we'll do this again.
We'll do it again.
Again, for sure.
Excellent.